When you look at the world as it actually is, rather than the world as you would like it to be, you see an ongoing procession of chaos and order, collision and repair, suffering and triumph. Human beings are thrown into this dynamic as if into a story already half written. They inherit language, law, myth, and habit, and they are expected to navigate a landscape that is both terrifically beautiful and unbearably cruel. In that primordial place between the known and the unknown, strength becomes more than a physical capacity. It becomes a moral and psychological necessity. The strongest women, and I mean by that women who bear the weight of responsibility, who stand up under the burden of being caretakers of meaning, who refuse the easy victimization narratives and instead take aim at the difficult tasks of living, are among the most extraordinary phenomena we have witnessed. They are not merely strong in the sense of muscle or loudness. They are strong because they have integrated suffering into a forward moving structure of life, because they have learned to shoulder responsibility so that others might be saved from the abyss into which they themselves once nearly fell. Consider the archetype of the caregiver for a moment. It is old. It predates civilizations and governments. It lies in the burrow, in the hive, in the den, wherever vulnerability gathers and needs tending. The caregiver organizes the world for those incapable of organizing it themselves. The caregiver teaches the next generation, feeds the vulnerable, stands sentinel while others sleep. This is not sentimental work. It is work that requires discipline, courage, and an attitude of moral seriousness. To perform it well, one must have an adequate model of the world, an understanding of the dangers that lurk in chaos, and the capacity to act despite fear. Women who take up this mantle and do so without self-deception, who see the price of life and yet choose to pay it, enact a sacrificial structure that is essential to civilization itself. If you fail to see this as an achievement of the highest order, then you have not noticed how fragile the scaffolding of stable societies actually is. Strength of character is often mistaken for domination or aggression, but that is a cheap and misleading substitution. True strength is the willingness to accept suffering voluntarily for the sake of meaning. It is the capacity to be tender when tenderness is required, and firm when firmness is required. It is the discipline to attend to the particulars of a human life, the way one child learns to read, the way an aging parent loses dexterity, the way a fledgling marriage must be navigated with fortitude and clarity. This sort of strength is not ostentatious. It is practiced in kitchens and hospital rooms, in classrooms and courtrooms, in the middle of the night constellations that are never captured by the camera lens. The strongest women are those who are present in the small, concrete actions that accumulate and produce a habitable world. They are the ones who patch the world's ruptures with patience, who name the truth about failure and then proceed to remedy it, who refuse to blame endlessly and instead undertake corrective action. There is something deeply religious, and I use that word in its broad sense, about this orientation toward responsibility. Religion, properly understood, is an effort to bring order into the domains where meaning has been lost. When a woman assumes responsibility for a household, a neighborhood, a field of expertise, or a community, she transcends the petty gratifications of consumer identity and steps into a role that is metaphysically consequential. She bears a structure of meaning for others, and that bearing is both demanding and dignified. It involves a constant negotiation with the shadow, those parts of human nature that are vindictive, resentful, lazy, or cruel. To bear responsibility is to confront the shadow and to transform it insofar as transformation is possible. That transformation is the real miracle. The ability to transmute anger into discipline, despair into hope, fragmentation into narrative. When a woman accomplishes that, she has enacted something like a creation story in miniature. We must also be honest about the price. Strength of this sort is not glamorous. It often entails sacrifice that is unseen, and it can be corrosive without proper limits. The world asks of its strongest women a disproportionate amount of emotional labor, and that is a fact that cannot be ethically ignored. Strength that becomes burden without reciprocity will calcify into resentment. Therefore, the most admirable instances of strength are those in which the strong woman organizes networks of reciprocity in which her efforts produce mutual flourishing rather than solitary martyrdom. She sets boundaries. She demands competence from those around her. She does not permit perpetual dependency, in that she is both tender and exacting, a balanced agent who understands that love without discipline is permissiveness, and discipline without love is tyranny. There is a psychological architecture underlying this phenomenon. Human beings need stories that map suffering to purpose. Without such stories, suffering fragments the psyche. It produces bitterness and nihilism. The strongest women often serve as living embodiments of stories that connect individual sacrifice with communal reward. They tend to the narratives that enable future generations to find a reason to bear their own loads. Think of the woman who refuses to let a family history of addiction dictate the fate of her children. She creates routines, enforces limits, models temperance. Think of the woman who pursues excellence in a domain dominated by skepticism and condescension. She does so not merely for herself, but to widen the corridor of possibility for those who follow. Thus, strength becomes transmissible. That is the real measure of greatness, not merely the capacity to withstand, but the capacity to make endurance meaningful for others. It is also worth noting that the cultural myths that idealize weakness or perpetual victimhood do not ultimately serve the vulnerable. They may offer a transient moral high ground in public discourse, but they tend to infantilize and disempower. A society that rewards perpetual complaint instead of competence will, in due time, produce more suffering. Women who are strong resist that temptation. They insist on competence, on self-governance, on the ability to repair what is broken. They do not avoid calling out injustice, but they also refuse to let grievance become a lifelong identity that undermines agency. To stand in that posture is, again, to enact a moral victory. One substitutes efficacy for performative moralism. The stakes are not trivial. Children learn from these models what it means to confront difficulty. When a woman teaches a child to clean up their own mess and to apologize when they are wrong, she is instilling a grammar of being that will resonate across generations. There are unsurprisingly ethical complexities to confront. It is all too easy to fetishize strength and thereby neglect vulnerability. The strongest women are often those who have the courage to be vulnerable, who can admit ignorance, who can ask for help, who can show their wounds without being consumed by them. Vulnerability here is not a moral indulgence. It is an admission of reality and a prerequisite for repair. To be strong is to be honest about one's limits and to invite cooperative action. The capacity to admit weakness and to seek transformation is itself a higher order strength because it opens the possibility of corrective narratives. The most powerful transformations begin with the simple act of saying, "I was wrong," or "I need help." Those words originated in a voice that has been socialized to perform strength as stoicism are subversive in the best sense. They dismantle illusions and allow for new structures to be built. A note should be made on the interplay between competence and compassion. Competence without compassion can easily become cold technocracy. Compassion without competence can be an enabling of ruin. The mature form of strength integrates both compassion tuned by competence and competence animated by compassion. Think of a physician who possesses technical mastery, but also listens deeply to the frightened patient. Think of a judge who balances the letter of the law with a human sense of context. Think of a mother who disciplines a child out of love, not out of spite. These are the practical examples of integrated strength. Women who embody this integration are not only stabilizers, they are catalyzers of flourishing. They make institutions functional not by seeking to dominate, but by ensuring that the institutions serve life rather than ideology. It is also instructive to examine the narrative of transformation that often accompanies strength. Many of the strongest women have come through traumas that could have destroyed them. They did not become hardened into bitterness. They became tempered into purpose. The metaphor of the smith's hammer is apt. Hammered steel becomes useful, not because it has been pounded, but because the hammering was accompanied by heat and focused attention. The process is painful, but the outcome is a tool that can shape the world. In stories across cultures, the heroine emerges not because she was spared suffering, but because she made meaning from it. That is the central lesson. Suffering is not ennobling by itself. It becomes ennobling when integrated into a narrative of responsibility and repair. We must be frank about societal dynamics. Power vacuums are filled. Hierarchies emerge whether we like them or not. The question is who will occupy those hierarchies and how they will do so. If the spaces of influence are filled by cynicism and nihilism, the consequence will be collapse. If they are filled by competence and moral seriousness, the consequence will be repair. Strong women who take their place in public life, in industry, in academia, in politics, in spiritual leadership, bring with them a capacity to orient these structures toward life. Their presence corrects trajectories that have veered toward decadence. This does not mean an uncritical praise of every woman in authority. It means that the ethical orientation of individuals matters. Character remains the pivotal variable. Strength untethered from character is destructive. Strength grounded in character is constructive. Finally, I wish to address an ontological point. To claim that strong women are among the greatest creations is not to elevate them above men in some crude hierarchy. Rather, it is to acknowledge a particular manifestation of human potential that is both rare and decisive. It recognizes that in the crucible of lived reality, certain kinds of moral and psychological achievements are necessary for the continued existence of a world worth inhabiting. The phrase greatest creation is meant not as hyperbole, but as recognition. Civilizations are not primarily constructed by abstractions, but by embodied agents who take responsibility in the messy particulars of life. Women who do this with grit, humility, and uncompromising devotion to truth enact a form of creation that rivals any architect's blueprint. They draw lines in the sand around what will be permitted and what will not. They teach children to stand. They preserve institutions. They carry the torches through nights of fear. That is creation, and it is sacred in its consequences. So when we speak of strength, let us be precise. Let us celebrate the women who reconcile tenderness with firmness, who convert suffering into responsibility, who refuse the corrosive seductions of both self-pity and domineering power. Let us resist cultural narratives that trivialize or instrumentalize their efforts, and instead cultivate social arrangements that honor reciprocity, enforce competence, and reward moral courage. For in the end, the measure of our civilization will be the extent to which it recognizes and supports those who carry meaning forward. The strongest women are not anomalies to be admired from afar. They are the structural pillars without which our edifices will collapse. To honor them is to honor the very possibility of a future in which suffering is transformed into competence, despair into aspiration, and chaos into order, a future that depends, more than we often admit, on the continual creative labor of those who refuse to yield to easy narratives and instead stand day after day in the hard, necessary work of making life habitable for others. And if we are to learn anything from their example, it is that the path forward requires each of us to adopt a similar stance of disciplined responsibility so that the next generation may inherit a world in which meaning endures and the capacity for flourishing is not the exception but the rule. A task that calls for courage, truthfulness, and the kind of sturdy love that, when embodied, looks remarkably like creation itself. because creating is precisely what it is to turn suffering into purpose and chaos into a home. And if you look closely, not through the cynical lens of ideology, but through the clarity of genuine observation, you will see that this strength manifests not in grand gestures, but in the quiet constancy of doing what must be done. It's in the woman who wakes before dawn to prepare her household, not out of servitude, but because she knows that order, even on a small scale, ripples outward and holds chaos at bay. It's in the woman who confronts her own past, the trauma, the betrayal, the abandonment, and refuses to let it define her children's future. It's in the woman who builds, who teaches, who heals, who leads, who listens, and in doing so, makes the unbearable slightly more bearable for everyone around her. Strength of that kind is not a theoretical concept. It's incarnate. It's lived. It's the kind of moral gravity that holds entire communities together when institutions falter and when belief itself seems fragile. These women become, in a sense, moral reference points, silent reminders that meaning isn't granted to us, it's forged through responsibility. The more they bear, the more they illuminate the path for others. Their very existence becomes a map for survival and transcendence. The tragedy, of course, is that such strength often goes unnoticed, or worse, dismissed. The modern world, obsessed as it is with visibility, tends to overlook what is quiet and steadfast. We reward noise, performance, spectacle, but creation, genuine creation, has always been a quiet act. A woman nurturing a child's conscience, or holding her family together through hardship, is enacting a creation story as sacred and profound as any mythic event. She is pulling order out of chaos, meaning out of despair, life out of decay. And that is no small thing. Strength properly understood has nothing to do with dominance and everything to do with alignment. Alignment with truth, with purpose, with what is good and necessary. The strongest women are not those who have submission, but those who command respect through integrity. They do not bend reality to fit their desire. They shape their desire to fit reality. And in doing so, they acquire something infinitely more valuable than power. They acquire wisdom, because power without wisdom always collapses into tyranny. But wisdom married to compassion, produces generative strength. It heals rather than wounds. It creates rather than consumes. If you've ever watched a truly strong woman lead, not through intimidation, but through example, you'll notice that she radiates a kind of moral order. People around her begin to act differently. They become more accountable, more serious, more truthful. This is not magic, it's the contagion of integrity. Moral strength has that effect. It lifts the standard of the environment simply by existing. It's as if the universe itself recognizes the presence of someone who has chosen meaning over chaos and adjusts itself accordingly. Yet, one must not romanticize this strength. It's not an easy inheritance. Every strong woman has paid for her wisdom in suffering. There's always a story, a moment when she could have given up, when the pain was too much, when the betrayal cut too deep. But she didn't. She endured. And endurance of that kind changes a person at the molecular level. It reconfigures their perception of life. They begin to see through illusion. They stop chasing validation. They understand that meaning is the only currency that doesn't devalue in the face of suffering. You can see it in their eyes, that quiet knowing that comes from walking through fire and coming out intact, not unburned, but refined. These women carry a kind of sacred exhaustion, the mark of those who have fought with the darkness within and refused to let it win. They no longer need to prove themselves because their life itself is proof that creation is not a one-time act, but a continual process of reconstruction, of redeeming chaos every single day. And here's the paradox: the world often misunderstands them. It accuses them of being too much, too intense, too independent. But what they actually are is awake. They have seen too much of life's cruelty to pretend it's all sweetness, and yet they choose goodness anyway. They have understood the futility of control, and yet they continue to build. They have been disappointed by love, and yet they continue to give it. That is divine defiance, the refusal to let cynicism become one's worldview. When you encounter such a woman, you are in the presence of something sacred, not in the religious sense, but in the existential one. Sacred means set apart. And these women are set apart precisely because they have aligned their being with something higher than convenience. They live as though truth matters, as though order must be maintained, as though every act, no matter how small, participates in the eternal dance between creation and destruction. That is what makes them the greatest of God's creations. They are co-creators. They do not merely inhabit the world, they shape it toward the good. Every civilization that endures does so because its women have chosen strength over resentment, wisdom over chaos, and faith over despair. You can see this in history, in the mothers who educated philosophers, in the healers who preserved knowledge, in the reformers who risked everything for justice. The world as we know it rests on the invisible foundations laid by women who refuse to collapse. And yet, strength of that magnitude often appears ordinary. It hides in plain sight. The world does not always recognize its saviors because they do not announce themselves. They simply do the work. That's the test of real strength. Persistence without applause, to continue doing what is right, even when no one notices, even when no one thanks you, even when the reward seems distant or non-existent. That's the essence of creation itself. To labor in the dark with faith, that light will emerge. The strongest women embody that faith. They know that to keep moving forward, to keep creating meaning where there was none, is to participate in something sacred. It's to act as if one's life matters, and in doing so, to make it so. And this isn't just a moral virtue, it's a metaphysical stance. It's the choice to affirm being itself, to say yes to life, despite its brutality. That's what makes their strength divine in nature, to bring life into a world that so often destroys it, to nurture when it's easier to abandon, to love when it's safer to hate. These are acts of rebellion against entropy. They are acts of creation, the highest calling available to any being conscious of mortality. So when you meet a strong woman, when you see her leading with quiet conviction, building when others destroy, speaking truth when it costs her comfort, understand what you're witnessing. You are seeing a force that keeps the world from collapsing into chaos. You are seeing a fragment of the divine expressed through human form, carrying the unbearable weight of being with grace. They are the living antidote to despair. When the world grows cynical, when meaning seems hollow, when everything feels like it is built upon deception and self-interest, such women stand as living reminders that integrity is still possible. They are not idealists in the Nayarva sense. They are realists of the highest order because they have looked unflinchingly at how cruel existence can be and still decided to act toward the good. That is not optimism. That is courage rooted in truth. And courage of that kind changes the moral temperature of the world around it. It tells others there is another way to live. You can choose to stand upright even when the storm is raging. You can choose to tell the truth even when it costs you everything. You can choose to love, not because it's safe, but because it's right. If you think about it deeply, this is what civilization itself depends upon. The refusal to let chaos have the last word. Strength like this is not loud because real power doesn't need to announce itself. It moves quietly, almost invisibly, through the decisions made in the still hours of the morning, through the patience offered to those who don't deserve it, through the choice to rebuild what others have carelessly destroyed. That's why we rarely recognize it in the moment. We only notice its absence. When such women withdraw, when their moral energy is spent, societies crumble. Families lose direction. Communities fracture. The invisible architecture they sustain begins to collapse, and we realize, too late, that what kept us whole wasn't laws or systems, but the presence of individuals strong enough to bear responsibility when everyone else fled from it. Strength of this nature is creative, not reactive. It doesn't simply endure the world as it is, it transforms it into something better. To be strong, in this sense, is to act as a bridge between what is and what could be, and that requires imagination as much as endurance. It requires the vision to see potential where others see only ruin, to find meaning where others find only suffering. The strongest women possess that vision. They can look at a broken home, a fractured relationship, a corrupt institution, and still discern the faint outline of redemption. They believe that nothing is entirely beyond repair, and their belief isn't sentimental. It's disciplined. They are not rescuers of the lazy. They are restorers of the willing. You see this in every generation. When a woman steps forward to challenge injustice, she does so knowing she will be misunderstood. When she insists that standards matter, she will be accused of cruelty. When she demands accountability, she will be labeled controlling. Yet she persists, not because she craves power, but because she knows what happens when truth is abandoned. She knows that comfort built on lies is more dangerous than discomfort built on honesty, and so she bears the cost of being unpopular because she measures her worth not by approval, but by alignment with what is right. That is the moral bravery of strength, to stand firm when even your allies begin to waver. There's something ancient about this form of strength, something that echoes through myth and scripture alike. Every culture has its stories of the woman who guards the threshold, who stands at the boundary between order and chaos, protecting the vulnerable from the monsters that lurk beyond. Sometimes she's a warrior, sometimes she's a mother, sometimes she's both. But always she carries within her the knowledge that chaos is never fully defeated, only held at bay through vigilance and sacrifice. And so she watches and she works and she weaves the torn fabric of existence back together again and again. Her weapon is not always a sword. Sometimes it's a word, a gesture, a prayer, a refusal to lie. Each act of integrity fortifies the world. You might think that such strength must come naturally to those who possess it, but it rarely does. Most of the time it is learned, and it is learned the hard way. It is carved out of disappointment, forged through failure, tempered in heartbreak. Every time she falls and rises again, she learns that resilience is not an inborn gift, but a cultivated art. She learns to discern between what is worth fighting for and what must be released. She learns that mercy must coexist with justice, and that forgiveness is not weakness, but the refusal to let bitterness claim her soul. Through this long apprenticeship of suffering and reflection, she becomes wise, not merely experienced, but wise. And wisdom of that kind is the rarest form of strength because it can guide others without coercion. It teaches by presence, by example, by the quiet authority of someone who has seen darkness and chosen light. We underestimate what it takes to hold oneself together when everything falls apart. We underestimate what it means to carry others without collapsing. A strong woman might appear calm on the surface, but inside she's engaged in constant dialogue with her fears, doubts, and exhaustion. Her composure is not the absence of turmoil, it is the mastery of it. It's the ability to feel chaos without letting it dictate her actions. It's the decision to respond with discipline instead of impulse. That inner governance, the capacity to rule oneself before ruling anything else, is the essence of maturity. It's what transforms raw emotion into moral action. The modern world often mocks such self-discipline. It celebrates spontaneity, self-expression, and the pursuit of desire as if those things alone constitute freedom. But true freedom isn't the absence of constraint, it's the mastery of it. To be free is to be capable of choosing what is good, even when you want what is easy. And that's what these women embody. Their strength lies in their ability to align feeling with principle, instinct with wisdom, desire with purpose. That's not repression. That's sovereignty. It's the kind of sovereignty that makes civilization possible because a society made up of individuals who cannot rule themselves will eventually be ruled by tyranny. There's another dimension to this, the relational one. Strong women do not exist in isolation. They create networks of meaning. They strengthen others by their presence. They bring out competence in those around them. A man who partners with such a woman rises or collapses. There is no middle ground. Her strength calls him to responsibility, not because she demands it, but because her integrity leaves him no alternative. The same is true for her friends, her colleagues, her children. She raises the standard simply by being who she is. That's the paradox of real strength. It is both fiercely individual and profoundly communal. It creates ripples that extend far beyond the individual life. And yet, even as they shape the world, such women often doubt themselves. They wonder if they're doing enough, if their sacrifices matter, if their quiet labor will ever be seen. The truth is that the greatest work of creation often happens in secret. The moments of doubt are part of the process, part of the purification of motive. It's in those moments that faith becomes real, not faith in a doctrine, but faith in the meaningfulness of good itself. To continue doing what is right when no one is watching is to affirm that the structure of being is ultimately trustworthy. That is what it means to walk by truth rather than sight. Sometimes, of course, strength requires saying no. It requires closing doors, setting boundaries, withdrawing energy from those who would misuse it. The compassionate heart must be defended or it will be exploited. Many strong women learn this too late, after years of pouring themselves into ungrateful hands. But when they finally learn it, when they learn to guard their energy, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom, they become unshakable. They learn that compassion divorced from discernment is self-destruction, and that love must be ordered by truth. And that's when their strength takes on a new dimension, a serenity that cannot be manipulated, a firmness that doesn't need to explain itself. Such serenity is the fruit of moral alignment. It's what happens when you live in harmony with your conscience. You stop negotiating with lies, even small ones. You stop pretending to be smaller than you are to make others comfortable. You stop allowing guilt to masquerade as virtue. You start walking as though your existence matters, because it does. The world changes subtly when someone begins to live like that. The air gets clearer, the noise recedes. Others feel the shift, even if they can't articulate it. That's the hidden influence of strength. It clarifies reality for everyone nearby. We might say then that these women participate in a cosmic task to hold the world together through truth, not truth as opinion, but truth as the recognition of what is. They remind us that goodness isn't arbitrary, that beauty still matters, that the sacred hasn't vanished, but merely waits to be remembered. They carry those truths through the mundane details of everyday life, and in doing so, they sanctify the ordinary. That is how divinity expresses itself through humanity, not in thunder or spectacle, but in the steady flame of those who refuse to let meaning die. Think for a moment about what happens when such strength is absent. You get a culture adrift in resentment, chasing pleasure to fill the void where purpose used to be. You get relationships that collapse under the weight of ego, communities that disintegrate because no one will take responsibility. You get chaos disguised as liberation. Without those who embody ordered love, who live as if truth matters, freedom decays into narcissism, and compassion curdles into weakness. That's why strong women are indispensable. They anchor us. They keep us tethered to what is real. Their strength is not a rejection of femininity. It is its fullest expression. It's what happens when nurturing meets courage, when intuition meets principle, when emotion is disciplined by reason. It's not about imitation of masculine forms of power. It's about the revelation of a uniquely feminine mode of creation. The power to bring life into the world, to cultivate, to sustain, to beautify, to redeem, that is not secondary power. It is foundational. And when it is joined with moral clarity, it becomes a force that no darkness can withstand for long. The truly strong woman knows this instinctively. She doesn't waste her energy proving her worth to those who can't recognize it. She pours her energy into creation, building, teaching, healing, writing, guiding. She knows that strength is not loud, but it is persistent. And persistence over time remakes the world. Every structure that lasts, every culture that endures, every family that thrives does so because someone refused to give up when giving up was easiest. Someone decided that meaning was worth the suffering. Someone believed that love was stronger than entropy. That's what the strongest women do every day. They keep believing even when the evidence is thin. They keep building even when the materials are scarce. They keep loving even when love has been betrayed. And in doing so, they prove something profound about the nature of reality, that goodness is not fragile, that truth is not obsolete. That beauty is not a luxury, but a necessity. They demonstrate that creation is not finished, that it continues wherever someone chooses to embody the divine impulse to order and nurture life. So perhaps when we speak of strength, we should speak less of dominance and more of endurance, less of conquest and more of creation, less of power over others and more of power over oneself. For it is that inner dominion, that alignment of will and conscience, that allows a person, and especially a woman, to become a living testament to what is highest in human possibility. And if there is any justice in the cosmic order, it must surely delight in such women, because through them, the world remembers what it was meant to be, a place where truth is lived, love is disciplined, and creation continues through the quiet, unwavering hands of those strong enough to bear it. And so, when we speak of strong women as God's greatest creation, we are not making a sentimental claim. We are acknowledging a profound spiritual and psychological truth that within every woman lies the same divine energy that called light out of darkness and order out of chaos. A strong woman is not merely a product of circumstance. She is the living embodiment of God's intention for humanity to rise, to nurture, to redeem, and to restore. She is the bridge between vulnerability and power, the reminder that true strength is not the absence of softness, but ability to remain tender in a world that often rewards hardness. Her strength is quiet, yet unshakable. It is patient, yet fierce. It is the kind of strength that rebuilds families, restores hope, and reminds men who they truly are meant to be: protectors, builders, and seekers of meaning. She stands not as competition to man, but as his mirror and his balance, the reflection that draws him upward, that challenges him to be better, to lead with integrity rather than dominance, with courage rather than control. Together, their harmony forms the foundation of civilization itself. Remove that balance, and everything begins to crumble. But when a strong woman stands in her truth, guided by wisdom, anchored by faith, and refined by suffering, the world becomes a little less chaotic, a little more whole. She teaches through her endurance that life's greatest victories are not won through force, but through steadfast grace, that you can be broken and still shine, wounded and still walk with dignity, weary and still give love. Perhaps this is what was meant from the beginning, that strength would not come merely from muscle or might, but from the courage to love in a world that often forgets what love even means. And when a woman carries that divine strength, when she chooses faith over fear, forgiveness over bitterness, truth over comfort, she becomes something sacred, a force not to be worshipped, but to be deeply respected. For in her, you see the reflection of God's own resilience, a glimpse of what he envisioned when he breathed life into humanity and declared that creation was good. She is indeed his greatest masterpiece, the quiet warrior through whom the world is continually renewed.